Okay, but our next speaker has come all the way from Ireland. It's a bit of a cliche that certain people don't need to be introduced, but I would wager I could win this argument that all of the Scottish advisor specialists, if you knocked their heads together, you wouldn't have anyone with the same amount of qualifications. She is a world-renowned immunologist. Someone could speak for an hour on the qualifications and experience of Professor Dolores Cahill. But we simply hand her the microphone. Legend, absolute legend. What a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Such a pleasure. Hello, Scotland! So we're all brothers and sisters today, and thank you for coming out. It's a real pleasure to be here. So my speech won't be so long, just to say who I am, for those of you who don't know me, give you a little bit of science around the coronavirus. COVID-19 is the disease, and then a little bit to reflect on what the solutions the governments are proposing or forcing on us, and at the end, what we can try and do about it. Is that okay? Yeah. So thank you. The mottos of my speeches as well have been truth and freedom. So come with me on a journey, if that's okay. So just before we start, if it's okay, maybe you would like to just take a brief second to inhale, close your eyes, and we'll reflect just for 2 seconds on why we're here. And I'm sure, like me, I'm a scientist and a mother, that we are here for the elderly who have unnecessarily died, for the elderly, if you just close your eyes, the elderly that are on their own in care homes, locked more or less in individual rooms, not able to come out for weeks, for children who have been told to be fearful of invisible things like viruses and bacteria when there's absolutely no danger, and also to reflect on the people who are wearing the masks, because we have to bring and learn to bring them with us on the journey, because we are here because we love all those people. But they are wearing masks. They are wearing masks because they love people too, and they actually have very good qualities that we have to recognize in each and every one of them. They believe what their doctors and the teachers and the politicians and the so-called experts are saying. So when you see someone with a mask, don't be antagonistic. Don't be angry, because they actually have grown up in a world where the people that they elected spoke the truth, and they and their parents' generation went to war to fight for freedom. And they can't imagine that people who have good salaries and pensions and have been well educated and call themselves doctors and experts either know that this is nothing to be fearful of, or if they don't know, they should know. So let's just take a deep breath and come with me on a journey for truth and freedom. So just very briefly, my background. My degree is in molecular biology, molecular genetics. I have a PhD in immunology, where I was trying to find cures for brain tumors. And then I went to Munich for 2 years, and then to the Max-Planck-Institute in Berlin in the department of Hans Lehrer, and we were involved in the Human Genome Project. And I developed a little chip that you could put thousands of proteins on it, take a drop of blood from someone, and diagnose them with an autoimmune disease. And I went on that journey because I saw in research there was a lot of time wasted, and if you could diagnose people early, they could make lifestyle changes or get better treatment, and they wouldn't have symptoms and they could live longer. And I then started a company, and we were able to develop early diagnostic tests for autoimmune disease and cancer so that people would be healthy. So my life's work is trying to make people healthy and to not be afraid of diseases, and also to say, when I say lifestyle changes, 6 of the top causes of death can be reduced by good nutrition and having access to good food and vitamins. I was also involved in applying my technology to look at people who had recovered from meningitis in Africa. And the idea was, if you could find out the people who made antibodies to meningitis, that maybe you could find proteins that would be vaccine candidates, that those proteins could then be injected into people as vaccines, but there would be nothing not bad things that would need to stimulate the immune response, and you could have safe vaccines. So you can have safe vaccines. But on my journey, our technology, the first thing we did was look at antibodies used in research and in diagnostics and in pathology labs. And a lot of the antibodies, we were groundbreaking and verifying those antibodies against thousands of proteins. And those antibodies were not binding what the suppliers and the diagnostic companies were saying. And when we went back to them and said, can you amend the scientific record? They weren't willing to. So that started me on a journey of 20 years of trying to get the scientific community to actually correct mistakes in research. And there was very little willingness to do that. So all through my career then I had to make a decision, either to comply and agree with things that were not right, or to try and stand up for it. And so I then started to work with the German government and the Irish government and the EU for 15 years now to try and validate medical information and research papers. And because of the challenges and the resistance that I've seen, and a lot of the time I'm told, which is definitely true now, that my career will not be enhanced because of what I'm doing. And if you go along with things, you'll be promoted, you'll be a member of a Royal Academy, you'll get to chair more task forces, you may even be president of a university. So I have to say, in the last 15 or 20 years, why we are here today is that not enough people, it's actually unbelievable within science, that not enough people are challenging it. And it goes from the governments and the funding agencies, and they know for 20 years that this is the case. So part of the learning from this is that we need to be giving 10 or 20% of research funding to validate and independently repeat the results, including from Imperial College London. So the other reason why I'm here today, what started me on the journey, was that in the first week that my child went to secondary school, which would be about age 12, I came home from a trip to Brussels, and she had got an envelope with the information around the HPV vaccine in the school. And in the first week, as all you mothers and fathers and grandparents know, you're very busy. And the vaccination was going to be on the Wednesday, and she had gone to school on Monday. And there was no patient information leaflet. And I had an interest in the HPV vaccine. And so I spent most of the night researching it. Again, this was about 2013, 2014. But what I realized is that normal parents, not normal parents, but parents, in the little leaflet it said, it'll only be a little pinprick. There's nothing to worry about here. But in reality, and first of all I should say, in Ireland there are 2.2 million women, and about 300 women have cervical cancer every year. And you can get a smear test, and it is preventable.
God bless you, sister.
Thank you. telling you this story because if you look at the HPV vaccine information leaflet, so the chance of getting cervical cancer is age 50, it's 1 in 10,000 people, and it's preventable if you get a smear test. If you look at the patient information leaflet that parents should be getting, in the clinical trials, 50% of the participants in the trial, 50% had new medical conditions. There were so many. So out of 20,000, 10,000 healthy people went into this cervical cancer vaccine trial. Half of them came out with a new medical condition, and 1 in 50 had a severe adverse event like multiple sclerosis, juvenile arthritis, heart issues, and some of the girls have all of these symptoms, and they give the vaccine at age 12. So they live their entire lives from age 12, 1 in 50, with severe adverse events. So you have almost 200 times more chance of having an adverse event at age 12 than having cervical cancer 40 years later. And I think if parents knew that information, they would not give that HPV vaccine. And I realized that the Department of Education and the Department of Health and your governments and your regulators and the entire research community is failing you as parents and grandparents and family members by not giving you that information. So I then had a dilemma that what could I do about it? So I actually went to visit a very renowned, I decided I would dedicate 10 years of my life at least to try and get the patient information leaflet to parents, and also I object that the schools should be giving vaccines, that parents should be there to watch their children. So in my own story then, it turns out the letter came from a vaccine unit, and it was about 2 miles up the road from where I lived, so I went there at 8:30 in the morning before work. And I said to them, "Where's the patient information leaflet?" And I met a few nurses and they shrugged their shoulder. And I was saying that if people knew that, they wouldn't actually consent to this. And so they said nothing, and I gave them some of the research publications. And I went to work. And at about 12 o'clock, I got a phone call from my school. And they said out of about, I think, 12 girls, they rang me because I'm a first responder and because I was the only parent who didn't consent, that 4 of the children had collapsed and 1 was unconscious. And the nurse and the doctor were heading to another school, and they asked me if I would come and bring those 4 girls around to visit their parents. And they just gave me a slip of paper to give to each of the parents to say, "Your daughter had an adverse reaction." But they didn't record it. So I ended up driving around those 4 girls to different parents saying that on the first vaccine, if the child collapses, that really you should consider not giving a second or third. And each of the parents more or less said, "I'm not anti-vax." And they ignored it and they carried on. So then I decided, okay, this is wrong. And I also, as you know, have been involved in setting up a freedom party, and it's really about trying to establish our rights for freedom. So I suppose the values that I hold dear are truth and freedom. And I think one of the things that we have to do, you might consider that maybe every country in the world should actually, you know, what's going on here is local communities and families against global, unelected, unaccountable powers. And that really what we need to do is to have freedom parties, that really we need to challenge what's going on. So that's just my background, I suppose, why I'm here. And as you know, a lot of you have said to me today, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the science. And if any of you have watched my videos or shared my videos, I'd like to thank you very much. And my very first video got almost 500,000 views in 6 days, and then it was taken down from YouTube. And I do have to say I support BitChute very much, because the founder of BitChute, Ray Vaughan, is there as a last resort, and I also am very grateful to people like Dave Cullen, Computing Forever, Garrold Murphy, and Rowan Croft Gran Torino, so shout out for them. And also I think we should acknowledge and I respect very much Julian Assange, and I know he's here in this chamber. And maybe we should give a shout out to our friendly police over there who are there to protect us. They're there to protect us. And maybe we should say to them, it's a bit like the people with the masks, that you're actually here because you love them and you respect them, and they are going to be the front line for the vaccines. So you're actually saving them, because none of the healthcare workers or children or anyone should be not getting vaccines. They're not safety tested with randomized placebo-controlled clinical trials. So this is the little bit about then the science. So some information. I won't maybe do as much on the fatality rate, but just very simply to say that coronaviruses have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and just in the same way that carbon dioxide, they picked the wrong molecule. Carbon dioxide is not a major contributor to global warming, climate change. And it's because of my research, first of all, to see that a lot of the research antibodies were not correct, and it was difficult to change the incorrect record. I spent about 12 years looking into carbon dioxide, and the societal changes that they want to make around carbon dioxide are not necessary and not based on good science. So when you look at the coronavirus, that has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. We have evolved with viruses, and each one of us have around 300 million viruses in each of our bodies. And around 7 coronaviruses cause some type of symptoms in humans, but it has been studied for 20 years. Coronaviruses cause symptoms from December until April. And because of the change in humidity and temperature and sunshine, and that we get glorious vitamin D, after April, people do not really have symptoms and die from coronaviruses. So that means that the deaths from May onwards to December cannot be dying of coronaviruses. Full stop. And so we don't need to test. So this, if anyone watched the Dave Cullen one, I gave the little graph that showed that there were 3 circulating influenza or flu-causing viruses this winter. Influenza B, Influenza A, and SARS-CoV-2. So SARS-CoV-2 is the virus, coronavirus, COVID-19 is the disease. So if the government was testing for influenza B, you would be getting thousands of positives, right? So every time you see the BBC, if you test it, and the same for RT, I have to say, okay? So really, they're wasting our money. Because as I've been saying, which is very simple, if you don't have symptoms, you're probably not going to end up in hospital. And if you're not in hospital, you're not going to die. So there is no need to be testing people that have no symptoms, so stop the testing. So coronaviruses, there are thousands of them, and also they weaken as they go into different people. They mutate, and generally those mutations make them weaker. And that's why as well you have less symptoms. Also, The coronavirus is also the common cold, so they're 20% the same. So you can see it like if there was 100 beads, 20% of the beads would be the same between the common cold and coronaviruses. But we had SARS, does anyone remember SARS 17 years ago? That is 80% the same as this one, SARS-CoV-2, so it's now called SARS-CoV-1. And so I have a different way of looking at the viruses. When we say viruses circulate, if you just imagine they tested it in Japan, in China, all the way across the world, South Korea, and Europe, and America, and Australia, all over the world. So that means that these viruses circulate. And they generally circulate between December and April, but actually this one probably started in October, November. So that means that what was the government doing in March, trying to stop the circulation of an invisible virus? So I hate to break it to you guys, governments cannot stop viruses circulating. And if any of you remember, this was if any of you had a number of flus like I had in December and January, that was probably influenza B, influenza A, and coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2. So you can have multiple viruses in your body at the same time. So really, we developed globally herd immunity against this virus probably in January, February, March. Everybody got it already by then. And what I'm saying now is that really, first of all, there was no first spike because on the 11th of March, and this is really important, when they declared the pandemic, the World Health Organization, if you Google Director General, Pandemic Declaration, World Health Organization, the 11th of March 2020, he said out of the population of the whole world on the second line, so over 7,000 million people, 7 billion people, that 4,291 people had died. 4,000 people. And every day in the world, 150,000 people die. And so that worked out at 56 people a day, but 1,000 people a day die of influenza in 2020, a day. 3,000 people die of tuberculosis a day. From November, December to March, 4,000 people, 56 people a day. So what the legal and political significance of that is that it was 1% of the annual deaths in the world from influenza-causing viruses, almost at the end of the virus season. So there was no need. When I read that on day one, at the end of the season, 1% of the annual flu deaths, there was no need to call a pandemic. This is all wrong. And as you know, about 40 countries have contacted me, and I've been in touch with about 15 countries. And Germany and Italy and Spain in another group of countries, they have about another 10 countries, and we're now coming together as about 20 countries. And each country has its public inquiry, but we're also trying to set up a mechanism led by Germany and the 3 million people that went to the rally. But what we're doing is that we don't have to get into it, but everybody knows that really the politicians, the media, the health system, the education system, the regulatory system, the civil service, they all have the benefit of your hard-earned taxes, but they're not doing their job. And really, shame on them, right? Shame on them. But what we are doing, though, is that in each country, also the legal system and the court system are not really protecting our rights. And the ministers in every state, so in our grouping of countries, we have people from Uruguay, Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, as well as European countries. And it was the exact same pattern. So we had people that we were talking to in May, and they had the exact same pattern, that people, the elderly, were not treated properly. People with COVID were put into the care homes. They were denied proper treatments. And interestingly, as in Scotland, in the same weeks, the doctors were taking huge doses of morphine, almost lethal doses, in multiple countries in the same weeks. And instead of the elderly in the care homes getting preventative treatments like inhaled steroids, interferon and hydroxychloroquine, they were given morphine. So this is wrong. But what's interesting is when each of us from the countries, and in a way why we need your help, is it may take us a few months to do, but really, if you have the same pattern that results in excess deaths all over, if in one country the inquiry might be thwarted, if we can show a similar pattern in multiple countries, and if one country, so in Germany, the rally organizers have told me that 60% of the German population are awake. 60. And there will have to be peaceful and democratic change in those countries, so you can have more marches. So 3 million people is a significant proportion, maybe up to the next rally, 10% of the German population. And they will have to seek peaceful and political change. But then what they can do, if it even happens in one country, or maybe it will happen in Scotland, is to hold the Prime Minister and the Ministers for Health to account. So I have offered, I can say there are hundreds of scientists that we have offered to be witnesses in those inquiries all around the world. So people who are my friends for many years, as you know, Sherry Tenpenny, Del Victory, and heroes like Judy Mikovich and Robert Kennedy Jr. So really, I think the main thing is the virus does not cause death. If you did not have the politicians, the media, and the World Health Organization, the death rate would have been... Now, obviously, all deaths, we cherish all life, all deaths are sad. But we wouldn't have noticed an increased death rate. So the death rate, when they called it, was the chance of dying on the 11th of March 2020 was 1 in 1.8 million. That was the chance of dying. And then if you've looked into this for 20 years, as I have, you may think and be kind to the politicians that this was a once-off. But if you look at SARS, the chances, there was a big kind of media campaign around SARS in 2002, 2003. And there they were saying things like the case fatality rate is 3% or 3.4%. So you would have thought, well, that's 3 out of 100 would die. But the game is that if you want to create fear, you actually test very low numbers. So say if you have 770 people that die of a virus, but if you only test 10 times that amount, what they then do is divide the number of people that die by the number of tests, so you can get a fatality rate of 1 in 10. But what I was saying in my first interview and all along is that because these viruses circulate, so in SARS they had 40 countries they tested in, but really that virus has circulated all over the world. So it's actually in over 200 countries. And the number of deaths in the world, even though they were saying it had this case fatality rate of 3%, in the whole world out of 7 billion people back then, it was 770 people died in the whole world. So back then the chances of dying of SARS was 1 in 8 million. The chances of dying of SARS-2 this year is 1 in 1.8 million. That your chance of dying of a heart attack and cardiovascular disease is 1 in 3. Your chance of dying of cancer is 1 in 3. Your chance of being struck by lightning is about 1 in 120,000. And in Ireland, under 65, the risk of dying from COVID-19 under 65 is 4 million people. It's 2 people in a million. So 8 people in Ireland have died who are healthy. 8 people under 65, so 2 in a million. So there's absolutely no need for this. There never was. There wasn't a first spike. And people like Professor Dennis Rancourt have shown that the deaths are in a peak in all the countries directly after the date of the lockdown. And they know that. Okay, so they know that if you isolate elderly people and if you frighten people in care homes and you withdraw them from their families, that you will get preventable unnecessary deaths. So what we have to do is to learn from that, okay? And I know it's tragic, and I suppose what we really, why we're here today, as you'll see, I'll be saying what we can do, but if we were to be successful, this is unnecessary, is to end this anti-social distancing, end the masks, and go into the care homes and hug your loved ones. So the 2 values, I'm sure we're all brothers and sisters here, Celtic cousins. You can tell from my red hair, the fighting Irish, the fighting Scottish. So I think what we then just have to reflect on is, as I've been saying all along, this is not about the virus. It really never was. It really never was. So then you have to actually, I would say, look back at some of the press conferences from our various politicians. Because actually, if you look at how they speak, and if you look in their eyes and you listen to the BBC and RTE and Channel 4, actually we have to give it up for Sky News Australia. Fabulous. So if they, I think, because I knew from January, because as you may know, I was involved in running one of these biosafety labs, and we knew the benefit of hydroxychloroquine, and also in a biosafety lab, even if you're dealing with infectious agents, you don't wear a mask, because you have reduced oxygen and increased carbon dioxide, and if you get dizzy in a biosafety lab, when I was doing work with ricin, you sign that if you die, they won't call an ambulance, because the person that goes in to save you may die. So you don't really want to be wearing a mask. When you wear a mask, your carbon dioxide levels go up so high that actually it's above the OSHA levels for safe working. So when you think of that we in biosafety labs, now of course you can wear a visor so you don't get splashed by something that's going to go into your skin. But we've known that that's 20 years ago since I started working in those labs. So what we have to ask is, why are the public health officials around the world recommending masks for people who are already afraid and elderly, where they might actually fall, and if you fall and you're elderly, you might break your hip and you will die very quickly. So on any level, morally, ethically, from the research, we should not be wearing masks. So as you know, if there was no need for a first wave, the virus isn't killing people. If we didn't have the media and political and regulatory hype, and there are people who are going to make a lot of money out of this, then we wouldn't have known that SARS-CoV-2 was the virus that existed. So then you have to say, what are they doing? And we have to say as well, there is no basis, no scientific basis, and I'm happy to be challenged. I'm happy to stake my reputation. And there's a hashtag debate Dolores. So I'm very happy to debate Nicola Sturgeon. And Jean Freeman, your minister, and all of the scientists. And if I'm wrong, I will admit it, but I'm actually happy to state my reputation. So what they're doing is actually trying to change our habits. And if we look into our hearts, our face and our smiles are actually the things that we communicate, to each other. 90% of communication is non-verbal. And what they are doing is, your face is your heart, it's your soul, it's your spirit. And it's actually, for children, what they're trying to do is for children to be in a world where they're missing the smiles of their families and their neighbours. And so what I'm saying is that what you can do in your own lives as one person, as one parent, as one grandparent, as one aunt and uncle, and in your families and communities as one person, say no to the masks. No equals freedom. So no equals freedom. No equals freedom. No equals freedom. No equals freedom. There equals freedom. So other things that you can say no to. So I don't want to jinx it, but I came in from Dublin this morning and I went through Dublin Airport and smiled at everyone. No one said anything. Went through customs, smiled. They were really nice to me at Aer Lingus, right? I was probably one of 3 people in the airport that wasn't wearing a mask. But they did not say anything to me. And if they did say something to me, of course, I would be kind and polite, but I would say to them that the values that I hold dear are truth and freedom, and the truth of this is you're harming your health, you're reducing your immune system, there's no need to wear a mask. I choose freedom. So no masks, no freedom. Some more no's that you can do is no to distancing. Distancing is disconnecting. So say no to distancing. No is freedom. No to health immunization passports. No equals freedom. No passports. I will leave my number with the organizer, and if anyone for their job is forced to fill in one of those health immunity passports, say no, and I will come over and be a witness for you guys for free. So there's no need for this, but what are they actually doing? The practical things. So when we say, what does freedom look like? When you think they're, preventing you for social distancing, wearing masks in your life, what does freedom look like? So freedom looks like hugging your grandparents, hugging your children, visiting them in the care homes, going to weddings with as many people as you want. In Ireland and in Scotland we have beautiful traditions of funerals where everybody comes home and the elderly look forward to their funeral because they know it will be a family gathering. And I think it's actually tragic that the elderly in the care homes, so I suppose we should be getting the message to the elderly in the care homes today, is that they should have their family around them. They should not die alone. They shouldn't die alone, because they actually fought, the people who are dying now, they lived through the World War I and World War II. And they made huge sacrifices, to go across to Germany and to Europe to defend our freedoms. And I think multiple failures have happened, but in the education system, we have to take a good hard look at that because they are not teaching the generation that are coming up about the importance of freedom of speech. And I think it was always said, if you want to know, you know who's in power, see who's censoring, right? So we've all felt censorship. So I think all of us, it's very hard because even the teenagers of my daughter's generation, they actually associate freedom of speech with hate speech. So these guys have done a great job in actually manipulating, you know. It's very Orwellian what's going on. So what we have to do, as we know, is freedom of speech, but just I think it's tragic that the elderly in the care homes now are in rooms on their own, and it's happening today. So I think it's hard for us to comprehend if this is not necessary. Why would the politicians be doing it? Why would the nurses and doctors? Because in Ireland there's a very brave doctor, just as you have here, Dr. De Bruin. And Dr. De Bruin is speaking out, and he resigned his position. He was on one of the medical councils, and he resigned for the exact same reason, that they were not giving treatments. And these do not resuscitate orders are shocking. And they are going against all the values that we hold dear, that people should be given proper medical treatment irrespective of their age. And I've said in other speeches, I think the game changer will be, and when they look back in 100 years, will be hydroxychloroquine. And I'm a believer in not only truth and freedom, but the free market. So what I would be saying to you, something practical to do, is maybe to find doctors, because hydroxychloroquine in Ireland and all over the world is still prescribed for arthritis and lupus. It's one of the safest medicines in the last 50 years. It's an essential medicine. The World Health Organization calls it an essential medicine of the world, which means that it can't run out because it's so important, and it has been used against malaria, autoimmune diseases and viruses for over 60 years. It's approved by the FDA. It was never in short supply. The adverse events were non-existent, about 5 in 100,000, and it saved, in all of the studies, as a prevention and early treatment, it saved everyone. So really, we don't need any of these social measures because we have a treatment. And I would just say to the pharmaceutical industry, the kind of message that they don't want to get, because 70% of pharmaceutical industry profits are from vaccines. And one of the CEOs of a vaccine company 20 years ago, when the clinical trials were failing, and I was thinking at the time, no wonder they're failing, because all of the reagents they're using to do the research are not actually specific with what they're supposed to be. So there's a lot of junk science. But he said, why are we doing research, developing drugs for diseases people have? Why don't we give them something for diseases, like chronic diseases, that we have treatments for? So they started building their market. And if any of you have looked, some of the highest adverse events associated with vaccines that have metals in them, like titanium, cobalt, steel, mercury, aluminium, and mercury for 20 years. So mercury is one of the top 10 most toxic ingredients in the world, up there with uranium and asbestos. Babies don't really develop any immune system until 9 months, if not until 3 years. And in some countries like Ireland, they are injecting a vaccine for a sexually transmitted disease on day 1. And most vaccines don't last more than 8 years. And they contain aluminium, which means that the side effects of that are often the babies have a hard time actually getting rid of the aluminium from their body, so that they are crying when they're with their mother on day 1, and they are upset and they have headaches and they're suffering adverse events, so that the natural bonding between the baby and the mother. So there should be no injection of vaccines for babies, and they should be safety tested. So I'm nearly at the end. So just to say, that the other thing that you have to see with the government and with the World Health Organization, so I'm of course a believer as well in democracy and accountability. So some of the things, that what we've done is all of the governments and the medical organizations are saying the World Health Organization are telling this, right? They are not elected and they're not accountable. And also every second week they have a different thing. So the World Health Organization and Fauci said no masks when coronaviruses were at the peak circulation. And then when the summertime is there and there's no death, we have masks. So what you have to do is not only are they exaggerating the fear, but they're actually creating confusion. So confusion reigns when there are lies present, right? Simple truth comes from the heart, and we know it can be verified. So when you see complicated lies and mistruths and the research can't be validated, this is not science. This is not the way to govern. This is not accountable. So what I will be saying is, we need to bring back democracy to our local nations and fight for freedom. So just to finish up then, what can you do when you go home? Is first of all, maybe try and in your heart, when you see someone with a mask, especially an elderly person, rather than feeling challenged about it, try and have love and kindness and respect in your heart. Because the agenda of the governments and multiple governments is to create division, as you saw they've done it very well, so division by religion, division by color, division by political orientation, division by globalism, division by the EU. And that is what the ultimate goal, or some of the things that we are hearing now, is that they want to have a lockdown in London on the 21st of September in order to prevent further rising in rallies and to prevent our free speech and freedom of assembly. The other thing that they're talking about, and I'm just saying it now so that if you see it coming, that this is part potentially of the agenda, is COVID-20 and COVID-21. Or maybe they might say botulism or anthrax. So why it's important that you understand and not be afraid of this is that our beautiful immune system, if you are well nourished, can actually fight off most of these bacteria, and viruses, and if your doctor gives you proper treatment, you will be able to survive. So there could be COVID-20, COVID-21, there could be botulism, and the other thing they may do is actually contaminate hydroxychloroquine. So it's important that you know that. And then for the vaccines, if the children or adults are getting them, the first one could just be saline with very little in them. And then they'll say, you see, there's no problem. And then it could be that the second or third vaccine is contaminated. So what we're asking for, but we don't have any funding for it, we're trying to figure out how we can do it, is we need to have a collection of countries that we can, before anybody injects anything in your children or in the elderly, that every 1 in 100 or 1 in 500 randomly the vaccines are taken and analysed, and no one should accept that someone comes along with the vaccine that's not safety tested and that you don't get the full informed consent. So just my message is that what people are saying is each on their own, you are only maybe in your families or communities 1 in 100, 1 in 50. So I had the idea this morning that maybe when you come to this rally or the next one, that you could set up a little table for each of your shires, or counties. And then if you're the only one in your little shire, you could sign your name and say, I'd like to be connected. And that on a positive note, that you are the leaders, right? You are here, and I won't go into it today, but there will be a more beautiful world. It might take us 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, but we will have a world where our children are educated to be the best that they can be. be critical thinkers, and they will be saying, challenge me, debate me, not just try and censor people and clamp down on freedom of speech. We should have it that children are encouraged to be innovators and create businesses and be independent of the state, and also be told why they should be independent of the state, because what we're watching is history in the making. This is whatever the powers that be, going from free democratic societies in the year 2000 to trying to have tyranny, lock people in their homes for no reasons, wear masks, social distance, don't hug your children and your neighbours, don't hug your friends, don't hold hands of your elderly when they're dying. Do not decide who they can want to decide how many people can come to your house to have a party, whether you can sit on a park bench, whether you can attend the funeral of a loved one, whether you can actually celebrate the joys of life, such as and religious ceremonies and singing and choiring and volunteering like in Scouts. So I think we are watching history in the making, and what we have to say is in the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years, people will look back on 2020 as not being the tipping point of fear, but to be the tipping point of a new world, a world for truth and freedom of speech. Thank you very much.